what he said, of course, is that the principal hang-up, principal obsession of human beings is in this emotional sexual dimension. And this realm in the cosmic mandala, this red, yellow realm, you know, the yellow is the mind and red's the body. This is why people come to this dimension, because of this emotional sexual difficulty, and they have to work that out, and it causes their rebirths. And most spiritual teachers do not know what to do in terms of instructing people about sex. And so the main thing they'll say is just cut it out of your life. Be a celibate. I mean, that's what you'll get in so many monastic situations. Just cut out that. But how do you do that if you're a 21st century person who's already got, quote unquote, the disease in your body mind? I mean, I knew there was no way that I was not going to be involved in sexuality. I grew up in Los Angeles, as I say. I went to the beach in high school and all the girls were in bikinis. Sex was everywhere. There's no way I wasn't going to have to deal with it. There's no way that I could get a teacher to say, just cut that off and be a celibate. I would have, you know, I was already masturbating in high school, you know? So there was just no way that I was going. So Adidam knew what to do about that, knew how to instruct us. And there were many, many different moments of instruction relative to me. One of them, that's a kind of major thing you can point to, is something that Adidam calls the Oedipal consideration, which is an intensive time in which you go through your past life history and you go through your relationship growing up with your mother and your relationship growing up with your father, and how that fixed patterns in yourself that then are directing how you're operating now and how you're continuing to enact those childhood patterns with your mother and your father. You're acting towards every woman like the pattern you developed with your mother, and you're acting towards every man like the pattern you developed with your father. And it's an automaticity. And it's a matter, he said, Adidam said Freud was right. What is subconscious and unconscious needs to be brought into consciousness. And so in the early years, this was done by requiring people to be in relationships, but to do them straight, to do them right. And I sat there in the rooms with Adidam for literally hundreds of times when he would deal with a couple or an individual about their emotional sexual life. What do you do? Then what do you do? What's the conflict? What's the problem? What's the difficulty? Whether the difficulty be a couple or we lived in households. Households are ripe for people to get into situations with each other where one guy can't stand this other person in the household and it's like a war going on, you know? And Adidam addressed it completely. He gave a beautiful talk called Spinach in Your Teeth, in which he described that devotees need to be able to talk to each other about these emotional sexual matters just as easily as you'd say to somebody, hey, you got a piece of spinach in your teeth. Why don't you take that out? You should point out to somebody, look, asshole, you do this all the time. And I'm getting really tired of it. And it's really not in relationship. And you need to straighten that out. And then somebody goes, tell me more. I don't understand what I'm doing. Why is it so offensive to you? And Adidam required us to have all those conversations. And in relationship, it's even more intense. You know, what about it? And we did all sorts of things. We had one period where I went through with Adidam, it was called 3 in the Bed, where we had to have sex every day for 3 hours.
Wow.
And you would go through fights in the middle of having sex. You'd have fights and make up in the middle of like what, and then have to come back and report to him what happened. And then he would point out, what were you up to? What do you do? What is your activity? What's chronic in you? You don't have to do that anymore. You can't change those Oedipal patterns, but you don't have to dramatize them. And then we would all dramatize them in relationship to him. And so there's tremendous instruction. As you say, it would take us days to go through it, but tremendous instruction relative to the emotional sexual. And yes, I had an occasion where Adidam my Oedipal consideration with me and my partner together one night, drinking outside of Indefinable in 1994, and pointed out how I love to be rejected by a woman as an Oedipal strategy, because my mother was always playing around with rejecting me, and my partner loved to reject a man. And then he goes, a match made in heaven. She gets to reject you and you get to be rejected. He said, but that's all bullshit. He said, that's all not straight. And the next day, sure enough, my partner decided she didn't want to be with me anymore because we were doing this Oedipal pattern. And boy, that was a whole drama. We were at Naitumba. She left the island and went back to California, and then realized how full of shit she was, and she was back in a week. She left on one boat, she came back on the next boat with Adidas' blessing.
She wanted to avoid the actual confrontation of it instead of going through it and learning from it.
Exactly. She did not want to admit to the fact that she was doing that with me and I was doing that with her. Instead of it being a place to start,
yeah,
you know, a place to start, a place to transcend. And that's what you can't change it anyway. You have to just transcend it and understand it and learn what you do as an activity, what you're doing. The poor me strategy, or the spoiled strategy, or the steamroller strategy, whatever it is that you do. And there were layers of it. Adidas said each person is like an archaeological site. The layers get fixed and you switch from one to the other. Down, deep down, Adidas called it your pit of snakes, where all the really reactive stuff, and everybody way down at the bottom is rejected and betrayed. Every single person who exists is rejected and betrayed. And Adidas pointed out, and he said the cure for it is to remain in the wound of love. In the wound of love. And he demonstrated that to us. And to stay vulnerable, not offended, wounded, not hurt and reactive. And to be maintain love. Not to be, you don't love me, which is what every human being does, is you don't love me, but instead I love you. And he said the only cure for the loveless heart is love. And so this was called conversion, or emotional conversion. And the same conversion to the divine was the same conversion that needed to be brought into the emotional sexual. So an early book of Adi Da was called Compulsory Dancing, which was talking about how you have to participate. You have to participate in life. You can't, you know, be a shut down person. Even if you were to be a celibate, and there are celibates within Adidam, particularly now, you can't be shut down in your emotion celibate. You had to be dancing. It was compulsory to dance.
Yeah. One of my very favorite talks from Adi Da is called Renouncing the Search for the Edible Deity, in which he does indeed talk about that. The primal mood of everyone is you don't love me, and then we respond with I don't love you, and it's a matter of you know, we like they have this craven desire to be fed, sustained by something outside of ourselves, where we have this dependent relationship on anything that we look for to love us, basically, instead of having the strength and the whole bodily feeling to be love itself. And I think about that every single day because it comes up every single day, and it requires a lot. It requires an incredible amount of maturity to be love under all conditions. And I find that it's the exact same thing. If I'm not in right relationship to Adi Da, I'm doing this. And if I'm not being loved, I'm doing this. And when I am feeling whole bodily in the disposition of being loved, that's when my relationship with Adi Da feels activated.
Yeah, Adi Da said in an old essay in Breath and Name, what are you doing when you're complaining, pointing to yourself, contracting? And he used to say this statement. We used to put it on a poster we put all over San Francisco at one point, in which he said, come to me when you're already happy. And that would push a lot of buttons in people. They'd come around and they go, what is this guy? If I was already happy, why would I need to come to him? But Adi Da pointed to the fact that that's always a choice. It's always a present activity. And He used to tell us when we'd come to the sanctuary at the Mountain of Attention to drop it at the gate, just to drop it. He said, you always know inherently and intuitively what it's like to look and feel and act and be completely happy. That intuition is always there. And it's just a choice we're making. And that's where he comes up with this beautiful metaphor, which in the early days, the language sounded kind of strange, but now it's understood more. He used this metaphor of Narcissus, and that's what the ego does. That the ego is sitting in front of a pond, always meditating on himself or herself, and rejecting the betrayed one, rejecting the betrayed and rejecting the loved one. And that, that's a word I think that's kind of, that understanding in a deeper way has come into the, certain words have come into the vocabulary through Adi Da, I think over the last 40, 50 years. Another one is this idea of the self-contraction. When I used to say that and read that in the 70s, that was not understandable to people to say you're really self-contracted. But now everybody gets that.
Yeah.
That word it was such a potent description that Adi Da made that it's a kind of become a universal word. It's understood, just like ashram is understood or mantra is understood.
Right.
Weren't in the early days.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like people know who came up with that descriptor of what a deity is, and that is, no one said that before Adidam.
No, I once took this class on anger management, excellent class. My teacher was great. And at a certain point, I gave him a copy of the Methodist Siddhas. And it was really one of the best anger management, the first big, really good one in the country. And he gave me back the book after a few weeks and he said, everything in our class came from Adidam.
Wow.
I said, what do you mean? He said, all the concepts we use, and there were beautiful concepts in this class. I say anger management was all about relationship and everything else. He said, Adidam put him in, look when he wrote this book. This book came out in 1973. He said, he put it into the psyche of the country then. So, that's not anything that anybody could prove, and it's not really even important. It's just interesting that that's the case. But you're right, and I could go on and tell you many emotional sexual stories. There was a time when I was working on one of the books. It was called No Remedy. It was the name of the book, and that's another thing that Adidam would say. We would call our seminars No Remedy seminars because there's nothing you could do to fix it. You can't become happy. Adidam used to say you can't become happy. You can only be happy. You can only drop the self-contraction. It's not a progressive thing, I'm a little happier, I'm a little happier, a little happier. You'll never get there. So anyway, we were working on the No Remedy book, and I was only taking cat naps for a week. And because we were working on the book, and we got that whole book done in about 10 days, entire book done from start to finish, and we published it. So after that was over, I went to Adidam and I was kind of alone with him, and I was kind of bragging a little bit and kind of saying to him, I discovered a secret. He says, what's that? I said, that if I really turn to you in my service, then I hardly need any sleep. And I expected that he would say, wow, that's great, James. That's what. And he said, James, that's how you are in your emotional sexual character. You're always trying to be the hero. You're always using your mind to override your body. He said, I'm a realizer, and I get a full night's sleep every night. He said, you're abusing your body. You're undermining your health. You've been doing this your whole life. You got to stop it now. And it was like, whoa, but it was completely useful because I was, pushing myself and overriding any body signs. And of course I was 23 or 24. I could do that and get away with it. But Adidam was teaching. And it was always very direct like that. He'd point something out. And the moment that the notes would come, that he would give you some notes. One time he gave me some notes that I was in one room and my parents were in the other room fighting. And I was in the room curled up in the fetal position. And at the time he gave me those notes, I was like, Jesus Christ, will he just leave me alone? He's always on my case. It's so, and I really reacted. And the next day I was like, wow, that was such a useful insight. I said, I could have gone to a psychiatrist for years to get that insight. And it's so useful and helpful. And Adida required that of us in the midst of it. And as you were describing earlier, in the midst of your practice, things are revealed. As you turn to Adida, as you stay in relationship to him, as you do the practice in meditation or even any of the practical life disciplines, the right life disciplines, which are ordinary, things get shown to you, things get revealed to you. And they are very often this emotional sexual matter. And in the early days, Adida did it very directly with all of us. Not only with emotions, but also with sexuality. There was Sexuality 1 course, which was about this Oedipal, but the Sexuality 2 course was about functional and stylistic problems or difficulties in sex. And that was, what did you do while you were having sex? Did you come too fast? Were you frigid? Do you not come hardly at all? What's your style? Can you speak about, sexually? Or do you, are you shut down? One time he had the whole group around him, a whole group of people that were serving around him that he felt were really uptight, watch this foul-mouthed video that he had seen of this lady who's just having sex. It's like a porn video, but she's just cussing a blue streak, just cussing everywhere. And he wanted his staff to watch that because he says, you people are so uptight. You have to watch that. And it's like Adida was himself sexually active. And we knew that. It was not a secret in our community. And he was surrounded, he was an enjoyer. In other words, he was somebody who showed us pleasure in the body. And he said, no realizer is an uptight son of a bitch, aggravated son of a bitch. He says, but he would show us that pleasure and he'd show us his anger too. He showed us all of his emotions. And he said that we should hold on to the virtue of our emotions, that we should understand our emotions had a lot to show us and understand what they were showing us and what was deeper than that, and not to shut them down and try to be good girls and good boys. And he talked about what he called mediocre people. And then they said there were mediocre couples. And then he talked about exaggerated couples. I was watching earlier this morning a talk where he was talking about 3 types of people: Puritans, addicts, and what was the third? There was a third, cows. And he was always pointing this out and giving us ways to understand ourselves, vitals, peculiars, and solids, so that we could see these patterns that we were doing and be free of them. And why? Not so we could be perfect sexual yogis, as if in itself that was so important. So we could be free of our obsessive attention to it, in which we're supposed to be meditating, but all we're thinking about is getting laid, or, our problem with this person or that person, or, this or that emotional feeling of betrayal or rejection, and working on it, really working on it. And so he gave all of us to us, and he did it really, really focused in it up till 1986. That was his main focus in all of this. But he continued in a lesser degree after that till about 2000. And then he pretty much tried to not do that at all from 2000 on, the last 8 years of his life, when he was after the Richardam event. He said he had no ability to do that anymore. But even then, still to some degree, until at the very end, he took something called Saptana Sannyas, or renunciation, in 2006, in which he didn't do that at all. So it was always wanting to get out of that, but knowing that we needed that instruction, and knowing that he could give it. And because he was free, he could give us that instruction and not himself lose his enlightenment or lose his ability. And so it's a great hero. He was a great hero in this dimension. And he gets targeted sometimes because he taught about, you're not supposed to talk, if you're a spiritual master, about sexuality. You're not supposed to have a good time if you're about sexuality. I mean, what is the archetype of Jesus? Most of the archetype of Jesus is this holier than thou person. What's the archetype of the Buddha? Sitting calmly in meditation. They don't show the other sides. So, but that's not a real picture of even a real God man. What about the Zen masters with the stick? What about?
It's interesting that our culture is so sex obsessed, and yet the taboo against, the guru engaging in sex, as if that's morally wrong in some way. It's like we have this understanding or idea about sex that it's, or when the guru has sex, it's a manipulative sort of thing. There's something like a negative, or it has to be a power or control thing, probably because sex for most people is about power and control and not
That's how
truly
we would do it.
love.
Yeah, that's how we would do it. Absolutely. And I think a lot of that's Christian based originally, that, original sin and all that idea, that somehow it's very, Protestants aren't supposed to have pleasure, it's something taboo about pleasure in the body altogether. And so, yes, spiritual masters get targeted, and it's separated out. Sex, and spirituality are supposed to be completely different, which is why there's this obsession with Tantra, as if Tantra was simply about spiritual sex and so forth. And so, but Adida was a genuine Tantric master, but Tantra was involved bringing the divine or truth or reality into the emotional sexual, not simply about like being some, new age sex. Adida was not about that at all. And so it's a big topic, as you said. We could really talk about it a lot, and I think it's very important.
So I want to kind of end on this last question. You've spent so much time in your life in Adidas company, and you've been sharing a lot about that. Of course, for the last 13 years, almost 13 years, Adida has not been physically alive. What has changed in your relationship with Adida and in your practice in relationship with him from when he was alive and you were spending so much time in his company to the way it is now?
Yeah. Well, as much time as I spent in his company, most of my life was not in his company. Even in times when I lived at Naitumba and he was at Naitumba, I wasn't around him 24 hours a day. I had one glorious day where I was alone with him all day, just me and him. Many times when I was with him for hours and hours and hours, him talking with groups of people. But most of the time, I was not in his company. And I had to learn when he finally moved to Kauai and then he moved to Fiji and I was in California, I had to learn to find him when he wasn't available and learn to connect with him. I've been to India 20 times. I had to learn to find him when I'm in India and he's in some other part of the world. And so when he died, it was just going into that mood, just going into that place of, I know how to find him when I'm not in his company. And spiritually, there's been no difference. Spiritually, at the level of spiritual instruction. At the practical level, there has been sorrow about certain things. I mean, I spent my lifetime buying Adida books. And so if I see a really fantastic book that I know he would have loved, I get a twinge of, oh gosh, I can't show him that book. I might still buy that book for the library. There are certain questions I have that I go, I wish I had asked him that question while he was in his body. But they're really kind of detailed things, not about the basic practice. He made that clear. They're more like, why did he this or that? No, in general, the remarkable thing that our entire community has found, and he said that we might even laugh when we discovered it, was that it isn't different spiritually. That who he was as the bright and in his spiritual state and in his presence is completely tangible and evident. And really, long back, I understood that the way in which I would grow or the way in which I would mature in practice had to do with really my actions more than his gifts. That I could grow quick. He used to say, come slowly or come quickly. And that coming slowly or quickly depended on me. How much I wanted to be intensely involved in the practice and how much I was watching the news, how much I was involved. And he wanted us to stay informed about things, but there's a level of staying informed about things where it crosses over and now you're obsessed. Mm-hmm. You're wasting your lifetime He used to even talk about one of his favorite metaphors was people wasting lifetime mowing their lawns. That was this archetype for the householder state. You know, you're a householder, you're living in a house and you have a lawn out in front, and every few days that lawn just needs to get mowed. And that becomes what your life's about. Instead of it being about the divine in practice, it's just about mowing that lawn. And so much of what we do is like that.